Hello and welcome to our second UK Automation Forum event of 2025. With the UK government having recently finished their consultations on developing policy on an industrial strategy and technology adoption, it is fitting today we will be discussing a tool that could help UK manufacturing businesses assess how ready they are to adopt the technologies that are available to them to help drive the productivity improvements and growth that the government hope that their industrial strategy will support. We will aim to explain how SIRI, the Smart Industry Readiness Index, works and how it can be used by UK manufacturing. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, please put them in the chat and we will respond to them when we publish the results of this conversation on our website in due course. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our expert panel. First of all, if I could ask Alastair to introduce himself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Alastair Crawford, and I'm the Managing Director at LMAC in the UK. So at LMAC, we've got 3 offices in the UK, New Zealand, and Australia. We've been around for about 20 years, and in the last 6 to 7 years, we really heavily focused on helping manufacturing companies to plan, deploy, and scale their digital transformation programs.
Thank you, Alastair. And now if I could introduce you to Rab.
Hi, I'm Professor Rab Scott. I'm Director of Industrial Digitalisation at the AMRC, the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre, which is part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult.
Thanks, Rab. And finally, if I could introduce you, please, to Mike.
Thank you, Peter. So Mike Wilson, I'm Chief Automation Officer at the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which is also part of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult. And I also have the pleasure to be Chair of the UK Automation Forum, and it's always a pleasure to bring these topics to the audience.
Thanks, Mike. So to start things off, first of all, Alastair will give you a brief presentation on SIRI, and then that will be followed then by a Q&A session with our panel. Over to you, Alastair.
Thank you. Right, so I'm going to start with an introduction to SIRI, which, as Peter explained, is the Smart Industry Readiness Index. And this has been around for nearly 8 years now. It was started, born in Singapore, with the intention of how do Singapore have got ambitions to grow manufacturing's contribution to GDP, and they were looking at a framework of how can they actually help accelerate the journey. And this is where they came up with the Smart Industry Readiness Index, with various input from consultancies and industry organisations, etc. And effectively, it's a framework of tools that are designed to help manufacturers start, scale, and sustain their transformation journey. So it's been around for quite a long time, and I'll talk around how it's been adopted around the world later on. And fundamentally, the challenges that SIRI is trying to face are probably the 2 on the left-hand side, which is there's so much technology out there, and there's so many things with artificial intelligence, cobots, robots, etc. Where do companies start? And this is the real challenge that companies have: is where do we start on this journey? What do we start with? What's the most appropriate solution for us? So that's the first thing we're trying to solve. And the second one is around, okay, now we know what we should be prioritising. What does that roadmap look like in terms of what are the foundations we need in place? What are some of the enablers? And what would that logical, structured program look like? So they're the main 2 things that, through the SIRI framework, we're looking to address. What should we be doing, and what's the logical order of how we address this? As a framework, the reason we adopted and went with SIRI when I started looking around about 7 years ago was there's a lot of focus just on the technology. And one of the main reasons we like SIRI is it's a holistic approach to looking at your processes, technology, but also not to forget the organisation, because without having all of these 3 things developing and maturing together, you're never going to realise the full benefits. And some of the other benefits around SIRI is it's an international best practice standard endorsed by the World Economic Forum as best practice, and it's been adopted across the world, which means that we've got access to a huge amount of data. There's over 6,000 companies that have been through this SIRI assessment across the world, and it allows us to benchmark, and I'll talk around the benefits of that later on. So they're the main reasons, that holistic approach, and the fact that we can use some of the benchmarking data as we go through. If I just give you a bit of a summary in terms of what does it look like, and it's split into, on the previous slide, it was just showing that there's 3 main building blocks. and it splits down into 16 dimensions. And if we look at the first building block, which is process, this is very much looking at your processes from an operations and vertical integration. This is looking at from your ERP, from your top floor down to your shop floor, how does information flow up and down seamlessly? Then we're looking at supply chain in terms of how does that data flow from your suppliers all the way through to your customers, and looking at where are there opportunities to automate and improve the speed of that process. And then the last one is, if you're in the process of developing new products, then how do we actually integrate product life cycle, and how do we go about managing end-to-end product life cycle? So they're the three main things under the process one. Then we look at the technology building blocks, which looks at automation, connectivity and intelligence. And we look at this across three areas: the shop floor, and how automated is your shop floor, how connected is it, and how intelligent, and how we're using that data. Enterprise, meaning the back office, so thinking around your design teams, your engineering team, procurement, planning, etc. Some of those back office enterprise systems around there. And then last but not least, we look at the facility and the same principles across the facility. And then the last building block focuses very much on the organisation, and we're looking at a couple of areas here. One is around structure and management, which is what skills do we need moving forward? That's skills of the team on the shop floor, and also the leadership competencies of the leaders are going to play a big part in realising the benefits moving forward. So what are those skills that we need moving forward? And talent readiness is really thinking about how do we think about what's moving forward. Sorry, I've just noticed they're the wrong way around on this slide. Structure management is very much around how do we get the company collaborating, and it's all well and good having the best real-time information and real-time dashboards, but if you don't have a culture whereby teams collaborate to solve problems together with either internally or externally, you're never going to get the full benefit. So they're the three building blocks split into sub-dimensions. And what we offer, and other SIRI assessors offer, is this independent, impartial advice from a certified expert. So to become a SIRI assessor, you have to go through a rigorous training program and become certified, which allows us to have confidence in that benchmarking across the world. You know that everyone's trained to the same standard. So it allows a company to benchmark where they are today. And this is important for businesses themselves, organisations, sectors, governments, etc., as we'll show later on. And more importantly, for the individual businesses, it allows them to prioritise where they should focus on. Because out of those 16 dimensions we just covered, businesses don't want to become excellent at all of the 16 because you'd be wasting money. We need to think around, for that business and its unique set of challenges and opportunities, what are the 4 priority areas that you should focus on to get the best return on investment. And then quickly, I'll just give you a quick run through on how the assessment works. And behind it is an algorithm, and these are the 4 inputs that go into the algorithm to help us frame where should you focus and how do we prioritize those 4 dimensions. And it follows this tier framework around where are you today, reviewing impact to the bottom line and where you spend money, looking at KPIs, your essential business objectives, and we also reference you to the broader community. So what this looks like practically is we facilitate an assessment whereby across each of these 16 dimensions with the senior leadership team of a business, we pick each one of these. So for example, vertical integration, behind it there's a framework of 0 to 5 explaining clear bandings around what the different bands look like. We get the team to vote on where they feel they are, and then we help to facilitate, and the team then lands on an agreed score. And all this is done using, the way we facilitate it is using Mentimeter to make sure everyone's got a voice and a vote. But what that does is it gives you, if you look at the graphic here, it gives you your current state, which is the blue bars. So you end up with, against the 16 dimensions, where are we today from 0 to 5? We look at your costs against these 10 cost categories, how much you spend on raw materials, consumables, depreciation, etc., etc. This helps us to prioritize where can some of the principles and dimensions have the biggest impact on your costs. We ask the business to prioritize 5 KPIs out of these 4 key areas. Are they looking to improve productivity, become more flexible, improve quality, or bring things to market or deliver products quicker? And we ask the team to prioritize which of the 5 KPIs that you need to see the biggest improvement in on your journey. So again, there are dimensions linked to that. So if you're wanting to improve asset and equipment efficiency, then there's going to be certain dimensions you want to focus on that's going to help you to improve those KPIs. And the last thing we do is we go through and we benchmark you against a sector within your industry. And what this allows you to do is we look at the 3 Bs, which are where are the bottom performers in your sector, where are the middle, and where are the best in class. And this is always interesting for businesses, organizations, governments, etc. The reason we use it from an algorithm point of view is we're looking at where are you compared to the best in class, logic being that if there's a big gap between where you are and best in class within your sector, the technology and approach is already prevalent, it's already being used, therefore there's potentially a lower cost of adoption. So it's just another lens to look through in terms of where can we get the biggest gains and the quickest wins. So they're the 4 inputs that come together, and out of the back of that, what you get is your benchmarking results and explanation around why, the 4 priority dimensions that have come out. So for you as a business, looking at your costs, looking at your KPIs, looking at your strategic objectives and what you're wanting to do and achieve, these are the 4 areas that you should focus on to begin with to get the biggest return on investment. We can then give you some examples around, and here's, like we said before, we're independent, so we're not saying go and buy this software, but what we are doing is saying you should focus on vertical integration, and maybe you need to think about a manufacturing execution system, and these are the kind of benefits you would get from implementing that and how it would align with your KPIs and costs. And then that's all pulled together into a roadmap to go, and here's how you should logically do that from a timing point of view. Sharing my screen, that's hopefully a good summary of what the framework is about and how we approach that.
That's great. Thanks, Alastair. Sorry, just unmuting myself there. So obviously SIRI is one of a number of tools or solutions that are out there to look at this. Could you explain maybe a little bit, Alastair, about why SIRI works and why maybe it's a more effective tool than some of the others that are out there in the market?
Yeah, I think one of the ones I touched on before around how it is a holistic high-level approach where we're looking at a balance between process technology and in the organisation, and some of the other frameworks that I've seen are more skewed towards the technology. I've also seen a lot of the other frameworks are more of a self-assessment where you're going through 100 different questions and you're rating yourself in terms of where are we today. And the problem I see there is companies don't know what they don't know. So when you're asking a company in terms of how mature are you at vertical integration, they've got no frame of reference. So it's very hard to say, well, I may have 0 or a 5. And you're going to get the optimistic people that will go up here and you're going to get the opposite. So by having a certified independent person and some clear bandings around actually, this is what it means to be mature in this area, and us facilitate that is really powerful. And I think the biggest feedback we get around the benefits companies get from going through the assessment is it isn't an audit where we're coming on site and doing an audit of where you are. It's an engagement process where we take the leadership team who, when I say leadership team, it's salespeople, it's HR, it's the cross-functional organisation, because this isn't just a manufacturing shop floor transformation, this is a business transformation. And often you'll see salespeople who don't understand it and don't want to come to the assessments and don't understand how it's going to impact them. When you start talking around what would it mean to you if we could turn quotes around quicker or we could reduce our lead time, would that allow you to sell more? So you start to get people to really buy into this, understanding what Industry 4 is from a holistic point of view, so that you end up with an aligned vision of actually for us as a business, we need to bring more sales in. To do that, we need to reduce our lead time, and this is how we can do it. That alignment in the education piece, that's the main reason why we think SIRI is the right tool to use.
Great stuff. Thanks, Alastair. One of the things that definitely comes out of SIRI is that it looks at the culture of a business and how ready the business is from a cultural perspective to look at adoption of technology. Mike, perhaps you could sort of comment here a little bit about some of the cultural barriers that we may see in terms of adoption and how some of these might be overcome.
I think there's a lot of businesses out there that really don't know where to start. That's kind of the key challenge for me, and by giving them a guided assessment, if you like, and you're then identifying the key places where they can make a significant difference to their operations, then I think you're taking it away from the technology and away from the solutions, and identifying the key places where they need to make improvements. And once you've done that, you can then identify the right solutions that will then match with those improvements. So to me, I like the holistic approach that Alastair talks about, so that we're not just focusing on one particular area of business or one particular technology. We're trying to find the right route to help a business get better.
Thanks, Mike. Rab, just a quick question for you. Which sort of business should undertake a SIRI assessment? Is there any particular size of business or any particular sector, or could it be any and all?
I think it could be any and all, because the challenges that SIRI tries to address are common across manufacturing. So we're at a tipping point where the C-suite is actually analog and the shop floor is digital. So there's quite often a challenge from the shop floor to the top floor in terms of communication. We need to improve the literacy of the top floor. I'm not talking about the skills, I'm talking about the understanding of what skills, of what the art of the possible is. And that is a common challenge. Whether you are maybe not a one-man band, but as soon as the number of employees goes above one, you have communication challenges. And this is a way to align the communication and the ambition within a common framework.
Okay.
And I think if I could just add to that, we're doing assessments. We've just done one recently with a multinational business that's got sites all around the world, and then we're doing one next week with a family-owned company that's got 6 people. So that just shows you the scale of kind of where obviously you need to go. There's a wider group of stakeholders to engage, and it takes a little bit longer in terms of observing the current process, but the principles are still the same, exactly as Rab says. It's how do you get that senior leadership team engaged with what is it we're trying to do and how can we do it?
Yeah, and I guess the benefits to adoption of technology are uniform across all sizes of business. But I guess with maybe with smaller businesses, there are some more challenges in terms of understanding some of the technologies that are out there and some of the adoption. Rab, is that something that you could comment on a little bit?
It absolutely is. The opportunities are definitely out there, and this is sort of the role that the catapult centres have, in terms of we are agnostic, we're not trying to sell anything, we can show people what the art of the possible is, but also on any journey you have got to understand where your destination is, but you've also got to understand where you're starting from. And that's why something like SIRI is really, really useful. It allows an external pair of eyes to give you an unbiased, not vendor-related assessment of your starting point. I just think that having this framework adopted by companies of different sizes allows you to do that benchmarking. Back to you, Peter.
Thanks, Rab. Mike, is there anything you'd like to add on to that?
Yeah, I think one of the key elements of it is the ability to do the benchmarking, as Rab mentioned, because a lot of businesses really don't know where they stand in terms of their journey in adopting technology. They read a lot in the press or see it on TV or whatever, but as a specific example, when we look at robot automation, people look at the car industry and they know they've got lots of robots and just assume that that's fine for the car industry, but it's not appropriate for them. And it's almost having a negative impact. Whereas if people undertake a SIRI assessment and it identifies, and they can be shown through the benchmarking capability that maybe robots is appropriate for them in this particular situation, that it then gives them that knowledge which otherwise they just don't get. And I think that's one of the key elements of all of this, and you don't get it in many of the other kind of assessment tools that are out there, is that ability to then benchmark against your peers. And I think that's a key element of SIRI, and something that's going to become stronger as more and more businesses undertake the activity.
And the benchmarking activity, that's something that obviously is incredibly useful at the starting point. But is it that the benchmarking continues through the process? Do you have one SIRI assessment, or are there multiple assessments? Alastair, perhaps you could share a bit of information on that.
Yes. I mean, once a company's gone through, it is a continual process. So it's something that you want to be repeating probably every year, 1 to 2 years, depending on how quickly a company wants to accelerate the journey, because you do the initial assessment, and that's based on our current challenges, our current costs and priorities. You're then going to become more mature in those areas, and then you want to review it in a year or two and then go, okay, we're now more mature. Have our challenges changed? Is our cost profile still the same? What's the next opportunity we should move on? So it should be used as a continuous journey, and you don't always have to rely on external consultants. You can become, we've trained internal assessors as well, so we can go and do an initial assessment with the company, and then you can train them to become internal assessors so that they can go out and do it across their sites if they've got multiple sites. So yeah, it should be used as a continuous improvement tool, and should align with the company's lean journey as well. If you think around company's lean journey, it's not you're not done in a year, it's a continuous evolution of where we're going.
So mentioning that as a continuous process, and obviously you've got some experience, Alastair, of working alongside businesses that have been through this journey. Do you have any examples that you may be able to share with us of a company that's adopted SIRI and that has sort of seen some tangible outputs from going through that?
Yeah, I've got a few examples we can go through. I'll share my screen in a second. I think what's important to note here is we're often asked around, can SIRI be used to give an overall productivity improvement benchmark across countries, etc. And I think what's unique about SIRI is the priorities and the dimensions and the outcomes of it is very unique to that business. So it's very individual. So one company could be looking to reduce the lead time, another one is looking to improve quality, another one is looking to reduce cost, etc. So every business has got its own objectives in terms of what it's trying to achieve, and the roadmap is designed to close those objectives, and we can measure the improvement. So let's say a company needs to reduce its lead time so it can get more sales coming in, then we can definitely measure that and benchmark where it is today and say, by deploying these technologies and these principles, you can reduce that, and you can measure the reduction in lead time and the improvement in sales. So we can definitely measure it, but a lot of the time the measures are quite unique to that business. Obviously, there should be an overall productivity improvement, but if I just share my screen and give you one example that will hopefully resonate with some of your members. And this one is, just jump on to the next slide. This one is around a typical heavy engineering company, and what the challenge they had is the delivery in time had dropped to 71%. They were firefighting to satisfy customers, and they had lots of different mix across multiple sites. So it was quite a complex environment, and we did the SIRI assessment, and out of that, 3 of the priority areas were vertical integration around how does information flow from your ERP down through your planning system, down to your shop floor, and get real-time information around where are we at and what's the status of jobs around, has that task finished, etc. Where are we at, and how do we get that back to the planners and to the procurement teams so that they can make sure. It's quite a volatile industry where things are moving around a lot, so actually we need that real-time information. And what we did as part of this was we prioritised vertical integration. We recognised that they need some advanced planning and scheduling software that can optimise and see real-time what's going on. We helped them to identify the right vendor through an agnostic vendor selection process, and then just working alongside that vendor to deploy that solution. And the outcomes they got were, within the first 3 months, a significant step change. After 3 months of implementing it, we're up to 85% delivery on time and trending the right way. And also through doing that, they were able to identify some additional capacity. So that's one example of a company that had a particular problem, prioritize the dimensions, technology solution. Probably worth noting that it wasn't just a technology solution. Behind that, there's quite a few process changes in terms of what do we need people to do to provide the right information to the planning system, and actually how do we get the right leadership on the shop floor to, an advanced planning and scheduling piece of software is going to be dependent on getting real-time accurate information from the shop floor. So working with the leaders on the shop floor to go, how do we make sure that people understand the reasons why we need accurate data and supporting that. So that would be one example around how a company is addressing some of those challenges that's coming through.
Great, thanks, Alastair. You mentioned, obviously, at that point about independent advice, and you provided in that instance some independent advice on how to seek a vendor for the digital solution. I think one of the challenges that businesses face in terms of adoption of automation, physical automation, is the ability to select and work with the right vendor. Mike and Rab, I think in this area, you're probably best placed to talk. How would a business go about getting some independent advice on how to identify a vendor to work with in terms of providing an automation solution?
Go on, Rab.
I was just going to say, I think that question is really one of the reasons that we work closely with Alastair and the LMAC, in that the catapult, the high value manufacturing catapult, were established to provide independent agnostic advice and demonstration, and the potential to engage and try before you buy, if you like, with a number of different technical solutions across the digital domain. Now, of these, it's the latest buzzwords, AI, data, and all of this sort of stuff. But fundamental robotics and automation is actually what Mike is strongest at. So I shall pass over to Mike.
Thank you, Rab. So yes, we're very happy to engage with any business that wants to adopt, as Rab says, AI, digital, all the way through to automation, robotics, and so on. The key thing for me, and the benefit of taking the SIRI approach, is that they're going to come along with already some knowledge as to what they want to do and why they want to do it. So when we're trying to solve a particular problem, that the business already has some understanding of what it is they're trying to address, which then helps us develop the right solution for them. And that might be helping them identify an application, write a specification, and then choose the right supplier for that. And we're very happy to do that through any of the centres inside the high value manufacturing catapult. Or it might be that it's a digital solution and we're following a similar pattern. It's maybe not just robotics, it's maybe something in the digital world. But one of the harder things for us, if you like, is when businesses come to us almost with an open book and say, we want to apply technology. And that is a real challenge for us, because we don't quite know where they want to start. So by undertaking an assessment like SIRI beforehand, it gives us that kind of guidance as to where we can start to have the best effect on that business. But if anybody wants to reach out and talk about how they can adopt these kind of technologies within their businesses, then by all means get in touch.
Yeah, that's the ideal way it works, isn't it? It's a funnel around. There's so much we could be doing. Let's funnel it down to these are the areas you want to focus on. And then there was a good example probably about 6 months ago, actually, where we'd done the SIRI assessment. We'd identified shop floor automation was going to really help the business. And they were a welding organisation, and they were looking at how they were doing low volume, high value parts. So it didn't naturally lend itself to heavy robotics, but that's where I got MTC involved. So just that collaboration, we're going, look, I'm not an expert and we're never going to be the experts in these fields, but then being able to point them in the right direction to the people at the HVMCs allows them to come in and apply their expertise and give them a good example of what could be done. So yeah, it does work nicely if we can just follow that thread all the way through.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alastair. And I think one of the things that perhaps Mike and I have spoken about on a number of occasions over the years is we're constantly comparing ourselves as a nation against other manufacturing nations and where we sit. And I think often we're quite frustrated about how far behind we are other industrial nations in terms of the adoption of technology. Obviously, you mentioned, Alastair, about international benchmarking and SIRI being a global framework. Could you explain maybe a little bit about how other nations are leveraging the SIRI program?
Sorry, just on mute. Yeah, sure. I can talk through that, and again, I'll share a couple of slides around what's going on in this area. But it was born in Singapore, and it's been heavily adopted across that area of the world, and it's now slowly coming over this way as well. Sorry, just share my screen. I mentioned that there's benefits to industry organisations, governments, etc. If we think around what can come out of a SIRI assessment and how this information could be used, there's various examples. I'm not going to go through all of these, but this one's just showing how we can look at SIRI and think about, you know, where do different sectors sit and what's their level of maturity and what are some of the challenges that they have. This becomes quite interesting for governments, for industry associations, etc. So we've got access to some of this data and how we can use this to advise things. Now, a couple of examples of how other countries are adopting it and using it. Then New Zealand, which is where I spent 12 years and where we started off with SIRI about 6 or 7 years ago. What they did is they adopted SIRI as their standard. So they had a similar challenge to Singapore in that they wanted to increase manufacturing's contribution to GDP. And they were looking at how do we accelerate and scale manufacturing's adoption of technology. And they formed the Smart Factory Assessment, and SIRI, we were delivering that program using SIRI as the backbone. And I'll not go through the details, but you'll be able to copy this link here. And this is a link to the website in New Zealand, a link to the report around why they went after SIRI and the benefits. And there's lots of case studies in there. There's videos of companies and what they did. So I think New Zealand was a really good success story around how they were using it to direct. And what they were trying to do is then grab the data from doing all of those 70 assessments that we did as part of that program, grab the data to see what insights can we get from this data across various sectors. And I'll just show you some examples of what that looked like in a recent program that we ran in Northern Ireland. And this was a pilot program which was sponsored by Invest Northern Ireland, but thanks to the High Value Manufacturing Catapult and certainly Rab and Mike for supporting this, is wanted to do a pilot to prove what's the value of SIRI being used as a standard tool. So we did 32 companies in Northern Ireland where we put them through SIRI assessments, and across various sectors we trained some SIRI assessors, and we were able to get some useful data. And what we've been able to get from this is the visuals there around the UK. As I mentioned before, SIRI rates against the 16 dimensions from 0 to 5, and overall the UK, our data showing at the moment, the UK sits at about 1.12. Now, don't be too put off by that SIRI, the framework is designed with lots of runway ahead of it, and we've never assessed a company yet where they're at 4s and 5s. So the typical results is 1 and 2. But you can see where the UK sits against the rest of the world in terms of maturity. And for the different sectors that we looked at in Northern Ireland, we looked at agri-food, advanced manufacturing and construction, and we were able to come up with the overall maturity score of these different sectors. And there's more data behind it in terms of what are the challenges, what's the cost challenges these sectors are facing, what are the KPIs they're all trying to influence, and what are the priority dimensions. Now, that becomes useful to sector associations and governments to go, actually, if we're trying to grow this sector, these are the problems, these are the challenges. We can then get people collaborating and working together to actually advance things moving forward. So there was a couple of examples around how it's being used by countries or sector organisations to work out where do we invest our money and what do we need to do to increase the adoption of some solutions.
Thanks, Alastair. And so from looking at SIRI and obviously other data that's out there and available to us, just a question, maybe I'll start with Mike on this. Where do we think the UK sits globally in its maturity with the deployment and use of automation?
Well, if we talk robots as, if you like, an example, because the robot adoption is being measured. Automation is very difficult to measure because it encompasses all sorts of things. But robot adoption, the UK is currently 23rd on the league table of robot density that IFR, International Federation of Robotics, pulls together. We are still the 12th largest manufacturing nation, so we should be somewhere more hopefully in the top 10, or at least in the top 15 on that chart rather than 23rd. So we're significantly behind all of our major competitors. And I think some of that is borne out in the fact that our productivity is not as strong as many of our major competitors. And we recognise that we need to do something about that. We want UK manufacturing to be strong. And currently there are significant labour shortages throughout not just manufacturing, but all industries. And therefore, if we want manufacturing to grow and be successful, we need to be looking at more automation to address those vacancies. And to me, it's then about trying to figure out the right route, which is, I think, the key to all of this. It's not necessarily just about throwing lots of robot technology at businesses, because it may not be appropriate. It may not be the right answer. And likewise, it may not just be digital technologies. It's about what's the right approach for each of those individual businesses. And I think this is where SIRI as a tool gives us that sound foundation, as it were, from which you can then figure out the right approach to drive through improvements in our operations, improving productivity and so on. And I think it also helps in terms of, as we've just been talking about, in terms of giving government guidance as to what is the right thing to be supporting businesses with, because, you know, AI is, if you like, the flavor of the moment, but you know, a lot of us don't necessarily think that's necessarily the right answer. And I think it's important that governments given data that explains what is needed to help UK manufacturing to be more successful, because I think ultimately we all want it to be successful, because we believe in the fact that we need a strong manufacturing sector to help pay for all the other services that we want within our economy. So I think as a tool, I see this as providing an excellent foundation, not just for individual businesses, but also for government, in terms of identifying what the right kind of support is needed.
Thanks, Mike. Rab, maybe if potentially, could you expand on what Mike's been saying a little bit, maybe with a view of perhaps less physical automation, but maybe a bit more around the digital side of it, and kind of where you think UK sits in terms of ability to adopt some of those technologies?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, we are at a tipping point where the C-suite is quite often the baby boomers who grew up in an analog age, and yet we're trying to turn into digital natives. And there's a challenge there, because we've got to, first of all, educate, improve the literacy of that C-suite about the art of the possible. But it's really quite interesting. Mike mentioned that the use of SIRI allows us to provide data to government to drive policy. And it's that keyword data. You know, we need to look at the data flows across an organization to make informed decisions. We've got to get away from the phrase, I think that, and turn it into the phrase, I know that. So let's move away from the implicit understanding, and let's look at the explicit data. Now, we do have a challenge with that, because we've got an aging workforce. So there are opportunities there to use advanced digital technologies to capture the implicit and embedded knowledge of that aging workforce, but then to codify it so that we can pass it on to the new workforce, the emerging workforce. And, you know, God knows that manufacturing is a great domain, great discipline to work in. It's well paid. It's, you know, it's in demand. It's just that perhaps we haven't got the right people explaining that at the moment. But if we can codify the current knowledge of the aging workforce to pass on to that emerging workforce, and use AI and other digital tools to optimize that knowledge, we've got a huge future ahead of us. We've got an opportunity to provide the UK with the growth that it needs through automation of data, automation of product, automation and movement of, it's going to be resource across the whole UK supply chain.
Thanks, Rab. Alastair, did you have anything that you wanted to add at this point?
I think they've covered it really well in terms of the opportunities that we've got there. I think I'd second a lot of the companies we're working with. You can see the information and the data it's in people's heads. I was with a company last week, and literally the operations director, if they were to get run over by a bus tomorrow, the place would almost fall apart, because it's all in people's heads. So how do we actually start to look at digitizing some of that and automating some of that, and then freeing up people's time? We had a sales team whereby they're spending all of the time updating spreadsheets and doing things. You can actually, your role is to be out there building relationships. So we're just seeing so many opportunities around where you can use data and technology and automation across the entire value chain to just take away that risk of reliance on a certain person and free up valuable time. I think we've got some great opportunities.
Great, thanks, Alastair. Just to sort of start to bring this to a close a little bit, I think it would be good to kind of finish up with an idea of maybe where this has been deployed elsewhere, maybe perhaps Alastair from your experience, and how it's been used to kind of help government form policy. And then maybe I can finish off with Rab and Mike with a bit of a view as to how they would like to see government take the information that SIRI could provide and what they would like them to do with it. So, Alastair, if I could perhaps start with you on your experiences.
Yeah, so just building on them two examples I was sharing earlier on, New Zealand, what New Zealand have been doing with that is the food and beverage sector is a massive focus for New Zealand. And even more so after the COVID and the tourism, etc., the issues we had there. So they've been using it to go, we want to grow this sector, and what are the common challenges? So using the data out of SIRI to go, these are the problems that the sector faces. They then brought a working group together whereby they had some of the vendors and the solution providers to go, having a clear problem statement around this sector is struggling with these things. You can then get the right people in a room to go, okay, representatives from companies, from vendors, etc., to go, how do we solve this problem? And what you see from vendors is there's a lot more appetite when they can see a collaboration of companies and they could potentially design a solution that's going to go across multiple big organizations. The appetite is there for them to get involved and really invest in it. So we saw bringing a working group together to then help collaborate and solve problems. And I think that's what we're looking to do with the Northern Ireland data as well, around the sectors that they're focusing on, and how can materials handling for the construction industry, etc. That's an area they want to grow. What are the common challenges that we're having, and how can we get that collaboration, and how can that be used to inform future funding to go in to support these collaborative projects?
Great, thanks, Alastair. So first I'll go to you, Mike. With the implementation of SIRI and the data that it might provide, what would you like to see government do with that, and how could that support our mission of growth and productivity moving forward?
That's quite a big question.
Yeah, if you can answer it in 30 seconds, that'd be great.
I'll do my best. No, I think the issue is manufacturing has not been recognised for quite a number of years in terms of its importance to the UK economy, and I think that's changed. And I think we're starting to see much greater interest in manufacturing. Hopefully, we'll have an industrial strategy in the not too distant future. But an awful lot of the policy, if you like, that's being developed is based on input from individuals as much as anything. So they're collecting input from trade associations, individuals that have a view in terms of what's important to grow manufacturing in the future. And I think something like SIRI enables us to take away any kind of individual bias. I'll be honest, if anybody asks me, I'm always promoting robots and automation as the right answer. And I know Rab will promote something slightly different. This potentially takes away that bias, and it, as Rab mentioned earlier, it gives data and evidence that can then drive things forward. But I think the other important element of all of this, and Alastair mentioned it, is we can get different businesses, but within the same sector, on the same kind of page, and that helps people like us in the high value manufacturing catapult to be working with the vendors and with the technology providers to developing the right solutions that are needed for those industry sectors going forward. So I kind of see this, I think I used the word before, but I see this as a foundation, if you like, to enable government, all the players, manufacturing itself, technology providers, high value manufacturing catapult, etc., all the players to be working together towards a common goal of making UK manufacturing as strong as it really can be. And I think that it provides us with that foundation, with that vehicle to enable that. Whereas without it, I think it's very difficult to get us all on the same page. And therefore I see this as a key element going forward that we would like to see being utilized throughout industry, and with government support, with Catapult support, to ensure that we can get as many people engaged in the process as possible.
Great, thanks, Mike. And Rab, do you have any final thoughts or comments that you could add to that?
I think that starting with something like SIRI can have major impacts in other areas as well, because this will help drive the net zero agenda for the UK. We've just heard today that the UK government wants to move towards more and more electrification. These are the sorts of metrics that we can start looking at, and look at the sort of energy transition as part of the technological solution. So, SIRI provides not just an assessment, not just a baseline, but also a roadmap of where we should go. But we do need the government intervention aligned to that as well. And we've got things like the AI Opportunities Action Plan coming through. As you and Mike have said, we've got the industrial strategy coming through. My feeling is that we're getting alignment now, because manufacturing is now being recognized again as being such a key contributor and key strength of UK economy.
Thanks, Rab. So just to sum up, I think hopefully we've gone through and provided everyone here with a good view of what SIRI is, what it can do, how it can benefit not just individual businesses, but government as well in terms of setting policy. If anyone who's listening in would like to have more information, if you please send an email to info@ukautomationforum.com. We will make sure that the question gets to the right person. As I mentioned earlier, any questions that are raised during the course of this screening of this discussion will be responded to when we put the review of the discussion on the website in due course. So I'd like to thank, first of all, our panelists for joining us today and for their excellent contribution. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and listening to what everyone had to say. So from me, UK Automation Forum, thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.